All right, so what we have here is the Olympus XZ1 from 2011. It is a 10 megapixel CCD camera, and there's a lot of people walking by. Trying to find a quiet spot in LA is next to impossible. I'm just gonna spill the beans and say I love this camera, but before we get into it, what about some pictures? All right, so some key specs before we get into it here. As I mentioned, 10 megapixel CCD sensor, 2011. It's got a 28 to 112, 135 equivalent focal length, so it has a good zoom on it. It's a super bright lens. It's 1.8 to 2.5 on the long end, which is pretty unusual for something this compact. It does have image stabilization. It has ISO 100 to 6400, and it has a movie mode. It's 720p. I'm really not going to cover it because I didn't use it. But what this camera is really known for when it was released in 2011 was the lens. It's actually the first time Olympus had been making compact cameras for a long time, and they called them Olympus lenses. It was the first camera that they badged with a Zuiko. Is that how you say it? Zuiko. So actually when I first got this camera, I was pretty disappointed. I couldn't figure out why the files looked weird to me. Like, I had been shooting Olympus CCD censored cameras like the E1, the E300, and just completely fell in love with those cameras. And so if this is your first CCD camera, I don't know. I mean, it's gonna, all the magic you read about CCD, I don't think comes through in the native files on this. But within a few days of really hunkering down with this camera and playing with the files in post, I was like, oh, I completely missed the potential of this camera. It's actually fantastic. A lot of people. There was a dune buggy race that just went past. The files opened up to me after a few days. I really discovered how amazing they can be. But in 2022, I think this camera holds up very impressively. And just some of the things that I like about it, it's very easy to shoot. It's super straightforward, super compact, very easy to have with you at all times. So I've been carrying it pretty much everywhere. And I don't have it with me right now, but the VF2 viewfinder fits on top of this and works seamlessly. The VF2 is sort of outdated spec-wise, so there is some blackout period and stuff when you shoot with it, but it's a really nice addition, especially in bright sunlight. In addition to that, it's just a better experience. I prefer to see through an EVF rather than on the screen, but it is also if you want it compact, you want to take it with you all the time everywhere, take the EVF off and you have this ready to go. I did not expect anything from this camera on dynamic range. It's a small sensor. It's not even micro four thirds, but it really shone in a way that I did not expect. It is pretty good. I think the highlights clip faster, but that's true of any compact I've ever shot. And then the fast lens on it is undoubtedly one of the best parts of this camera. It is fast, it is sharp, and you can tell why the marketing department wanted to highlight that. It is definitely kind of key to what makes this a unique and special camera. There is an ND filter on it. So when you're out in bright daylight and you still want to shoot at 1.7, 1.8 or whatever, what is it, 1.8? As much shallow depth of field as you can get from this can be had in bright daylight. And that's just amazing. I've actually had other cameras with that. The X100T from Fuji and the Sony RX100 line have built-in NDs. Actually, the RX100, did that have it? I don't think it did actually. I think it was just the Fuji. Such an awesome feature to have. I think all cameras should have that, but this one does. Super macro mode. Olympus is kind of known for this. They have it in a handful of their cameras. It's crazy how close you can get with this camera. This photograph of a flower that I took on a hike, the lens is basically touching the flower. That's how close I got. That flower was the size of like my pinky nail. The autofocus is totally good. It's not like the fastest, but it's very, very capable. It's 11 points, but like again, you're on a small sensor, so even at 1.8, your depth of field is going to be deeper, and so autofocus kind of is hard to miss, frankly. So I have nothing to say more about that. It has high-speed burst mode, like where it captures multiple frames, similar to other Olympus cameras, and it also has these art filters that I think back in the day Olympus was known for, like grainy black and white and like pop art. I definitely haven't really made use of those. They're just not to my taste, but it's there. And then RAW and JPEG. So RAW plus JPEG shooting is still my favorite way to shoot. I love cameras that have that, and this one does. So I have my JPEGs almost, well, definitely as a backup on this, unlike the Fuji S5 Pro that I just reviewed, where the JPEGs were actually like my main file. The JPEGs are backup on this. I read in a deep forum like some ways to customize the profile that you would never expect that actually did produce pretty nice JPEG files. I'll put the description in the show notes for how to do that if you want to give it a try. But when I shoot JPEG, that's usually the JPEG settings I'm using, and then the RAW is what I'm developing in post, and that's everything you've seen on my feed on Instagram. And then additionally, there's this ring on the front, very snappy. I don't know if you can hear that. It's lovely. It can be customized to whatever function you want. I use it as my ISO dial so that I can kind of manipulate that as I need to, given the setting. And then there's a quick menu. So the OK button on the back, if you hit it, you get into a quick menu. I love quick menus. I do not like digging through folders, and the less buttons I have to manage, the better. There are not a lot of physical buttons, so the fact that you can customize this to ISO and then quick menu to your other settings, the ND filter, for example, is in the quick menu, that's perfect. Makes it fast, makes it easy. Native 4:3 aspect ratio, my favorite. I actually shot like a standard camera that has a 35 millimeter, like whatever, 4:6 aspect ratio the other day, and kind of pulled it into post, and I was like, oh, is this 16:9? Like, it looked so wide to me. I'm just so used to 4:3 at this point, and I love that aspect ratio. And then there is a flash on the body. It is not very powerful, but it will do nice fill. It will do, like, you know, for close subjects indoors, it works, it's sufficient, but it has the hot shoe. So you can absolutely put an external flash on this and bring power to the camera, which I think is fantastic. And then the other thing you can do, it does shoot bracketed. This is not something I tried, but people who like feel very strongly about having extreme dynamic range. The HDR functions in like Lightroom or whatever, where you can posit all these photos together to capture the tonality from the highest to the lowest, has gotten much more sophisticated and can actually look natural instead of the crazy 90s look that used to exist. And so you can shoot bracketed if you want to do something like that, which just expands your dynamic range should you need it. What I don't like about it, it is a little fiddly. It's just like the buttons are pretty small. I have small hands. I kind of set it and forget it because it is just kind of a little hard to manipulate, and I drop my notes. Other things I don't particularly like is the fact that it's an old camera, right? So every time I take the battery out, I have to reset the date and time, which is a little annoying. You can charge it via USB, so I imagine if you do that, you're not going to have to reset it because you're not taking the battery out and therefore it's powering the clock. That's internal. But if you're taking your battery out to charge it externally, you're going to have to reset the date and time every single time, which is super frustrating. This lens cap is not my favorite. It's plastic. It is just like a suction feeling, like it just sort of slides on and off. They do have this string, thank goodness, because I would never be able to keep this on the camera otherwise. I would lose it immediately. Pentax does this with a lot of their cameras too, like their limited line has that, like, it's very beautiful. It's metal and it has velvet inside and you like slip it on and off, but I find it kind of inconvenient, not very practical. Has very short battery life, so definitely have some spares, but at least they're easy to pick up. They're Li50B batteries, easily purchased on Amazon. And the other thing is the noise does appear on the early side, like, I mean, if I'm pixel peeping, it's probably there at like ISO 200 or 400. I am not someone who complains about noise. I don't really care about noise. I actually prefer a little noise. It gets a little more of an organic feel, but if you are concerned about that, get DxO and run Deep Prime on it, because that pretty much eliminates any noise from any files from these old cameras. Brilliant software for check compatibility, though. It does read these files, but it doesn't read, like, for example, the Olympus E300 files. There's no electronic level. I love having an electronic level so I can see where my frame is. It does have grids if you want that. I've just been shooting it without anything, and, you know, I'll level it and post if I need to. And then the front of the camera is really flat. There's no grip here. Usually like a grip, but there is this like weird little plastic part on the back, and it's so light that it works. Like, you don't I haven't missed it as much as I thought I would. This is, guys, we're just rolling with this. It's like very run and gun. My daughter's asleep in the car. I'm in a park. People are walking all around me. It's been crazy trying to film this. The screen on the back, I'm probably going to say this for every video of every old camera, it's just not very good. And the colors look very off to me. I don't know if it's my copy or if this is like sort of true of all of these cameras. They look really orange and like weirdly contrasty. It just does not look good, and they are not faithful to what you actually get on your file when you download the file. So if you're freaked out at first when shooting this because of the back of the screen, just know the back of the screen is not accurate. And I haven't really shot this very much indoors, but I tend to think of this more of an outdoors camera, even though it does have that fast lens, so you can shoot indoors. But I don't know, the oranges get a little more saturated. I haven't found the right vibe, but I haven't really tried for indoors. I've really been shooting this mostly outdoors. I think it's like the perfect travel camera. It's great for landscape. It's great for like outdoor portraits, hang time. I need to work on the indoor stuff a little bit. And then my biggest qualm with this camera is actually the auto ISO. I love that it has auto ISO. But whenever you put it into an automatic mode like aperture priority, shutter priority, program mode, it will select the ISO for you, but it does not display it in the screen. So you don't know what it's selecting, and that drives me crazy. Like, I want to know what ISO I'm shooting at in an automated mode. And so that just means like outdoors, Sunday, in sunlight, I don't think about it. It will do everything it can to keep the ISO at base or under 200. And at the expense of the shutter speed. So if you're indoor shooting program or aperture priority, it will like let the shutter speed go down to like 1/8 of a second to sort of prioritize the lower ISO to avoid the noise. So it's just a small thing that kind of drives me crazy. I just want to see what it's selecting, and then I can base off of that whether or not I want to go into manual ISO or whatnot. I have been super happy with the photos I've been getting with this camera. Is it viable in 2022? Absolutely. Like, I am now of the opinion software has gotten so good. Lightroom has gotten so good. Capture One has gotten so good. DxO, Topaz Labs with their various pieces of software. The software is out there to maximize these cameras in ways that they couldn't even perform at in the time that they came out. So I'm way more interested in buying old cameras and spending a little bit more on software, which is always going to be way cheaper than a newer camera with the same software that you're going to have to use anyway. I am shooting this almost exclusively in P mode, dialing in 0.3 negative compensation just to protect highlights, and then bringing it up a little bit in post. And it has been one of my favorite point and shoots to use. Like, it is just easy. Like, I cannot find an excuse not to buy this. It's so cheap on the used market. Like, I think I got mine, I don't even remember, to be honest. It's been a minute, but I got it for very little. It has the potential to be dethroned by a few other cameras that are in my camera box that I haven't yet shot. So let's draw the next camera. I don't know why, but I always get nervous for this. Oh. This is one of the cameras I thought it might get dethroned by. The Lumix, you can't read this, but the Lumix LX3. I'm excited to shoot this. I've only shot it one day. I was really happy with what came out of it. So we're gonna do compact camera shootout part 2, Lumix LX3 coming up.